Hello everyone and welcome to our first MiF alumni interview. This is part of a whole interview series that we're going to be hosting, and the idea is that each interview gives you an insight into one region or sort of sector that sort of makes up one of our whole MiF class profile. My name is Lucy Palin and I'm a admissions manager for the Masters in Finance. I'm joined today by Lucky, who is the recruitment manager, and she might be joining in with the Q&A later on. Lucky, did you want to say hi? No. I'm also joined by James Crombie and Ronnie Barnes, who are alumni. James is going to be interviewing Ronnie, but I think James is also going to be sharing lots of his experiences as well. Hopefully this will be really interesting, as James comes from our 2016 class and Ronnie comes from our first class of 1995. So there'll be some different perspectives there. We're going to be having the interview for about 40 minutes, and then once the interview's done, we'll be going to a Q&A. So throughout the interview, if there's anything that you want to ask James or Ronnie, you can use the Q&A function, and then at the end, we'll start working our way through them, and I'll be asking all of your questions to James and Ronnie. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to you, James, and we'll start the interview.
Sure. Good afternoon, everyone. My name's James Crombie. I'm an Australian and, as Lucy just said, was a MiF full-time 2016. I work in the equity hedge fund space, and I was doing that before I moved to London Business School back in Australia. And a very long time ago in the dark recesses of history, I worked as an accountant, but I don't talk about that. Ronnie, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, sure. So as Lucy mentioned, I was a member of the first ever MiF class, which was the part-time class that started in 1993, graduated in 1995. Currently, I am a principal in a firm called Cornerstone Research, which is a financial and economic consulting firm that does a lot of expert witness work in the context of litigation and arbitration and regulatory investigations. There's obviously a large gap between when I finished the MiF and now. I've done a number of things, including working for another consulting firm and a couple of investment banks, but probably most notably, immediately after finishing the MiF, I stayed on at the school to do a PhD and was part-time faculty, finished the PhD and went full-time faculty. And for the last 18 months of my time at the school, was actually the academic director of the finance programs in the school, including the MiF. So in that sense, I'm sort of similar to the guy from the TV advert who said, "I like the product so much I bought the company."
Indeed, indeed. And so I guess you've had quite an interesting career after doing the MiF, indeed becoming part of the MiF program for a number of years there. I guess, why did you start? Why did you choose a MiF and why did you choose London Business School? So
like yourself, I qualified as an accountant. I think qualified in 1990, and one of the subjects that I most enjoyed when qualifying was, of course, called management accounting and financial management, and that was something that first really introduced me to the idea of finance as opposed to accounting as as an area of interest. And I'd been looking at the idea of MBA programs, but frankly the softer stuff, so the organizational behavior and marketing, just really didn't appeal to me. So I really was on the lookout for a specialist master's program. At the time, I was actually living and working in Manchester, but was just about to move down to London and saw an advert for the MiF and thought, okay, this is absolutely perfect. So I applied. I remember sort of Janet Dobson, who I would probably characterise as the godmother of the of the programme, saying to me, "You're absolutely crazy. You're moving cities, you're moving jobs, and you're thinking about taking on a demanding sort of part-time sort of program. Come back in a couple of years, and I said, no, I'm going to be stubborn here, and the rest, I guess, is history.
I see. Yeah, I guess the reason I chose a master's in finance are very much the same as yours. Is I looked at the MBA curriculum, and there's a lot of sort of softer stuff in there that I think is useful. It just wasn't very interesting for me, and I found the MiF to be, I guess, a much better fit for what I was looking for. And so,
so one of the things that's interesting is that when, and obviously you'll know this better than I do, but when the MiF first started, it really was a pure diet of finance and nothing else. And then over time, I think there was recognition, for example, that strategy is something that could be useful for people in a master's program, and then the softer skills were also important. So I think it's moved away. It seems to have moved away a little bit from that, finance 24 hours a day. But I think it still has that. If you're looking for a specialist, sort of rigorous, sort of in-depth sort of finance training without having to go through all of the other less interesting sort of areas, then it's that's what it offers.
Absolutely, yeah. I did the strategy course for MIFs, and it was useful just to know what people start talking about strategy in corporates. I'm talking to know kind of what they mean and have a familiarity at least with what's going on. It was a good course, but it definitely confirmed for me that I didn't really want to be doing a strategy style thing. Not my cup of tea. Okay. And so, Ronnie, what was your PhD thesis on?
That's a question you should never ask a PhD, because you're under risk of having an extremely boring sort of 35 minutes. It was. Let me try and make it as painless as possible. It was on the. Officially it was in accounting, but it was really on the borderline of finance and accounting. It really looked at how sort of financial information was used in capital markets. So it was what I would call more of a US style PhD, three independent essays,
okay,
each of which sort of covered different areas. But frankly, since I finished it and put it to one side, I don't think I've looked at it since.
like most PhD students,
yes,
I gather. Okay, and then you went on to teach the MiF. I guess how has the curriculum changed over the time you've been there? Like what's come in, what's gone out?
I mean, it was interesting. So I looked at the website quite recently, partly because of obviously sort of doing this interview, but I've also a couple of ex-colleagues of mine. One was on the program last year, and another one's on the program this year, and I was writing reference letters for them, and I thought that'd be useful to figure out what the program is. I mean, I think there's still a lot that is very, very familiar.
Okay.
So the core courses, the financial accounting, and I think the titles are slightly different now, but there's a corporate finance course, there's an investments course. One thing that is different is that there used to be a MiF only course called Foundations of Finance, which I had the pleasure of teaching for several years. And I always sort of characterize as the Marmite course, in the sense that people either loved it or hated it, because it was designed to give people a more, I won't say more theoretical, but to take things a little bit deeper than some of the core courses did. And for those people who had a sort of slightly more sort of technical, quantitative bent, it was pretty interesting. I think that we worked for a long time to try and to keep tailoring it to a place where it felt relevant to practical to people. And I don't think we ever quite got there. The other thing that's changed, I think, sort of a lot, is that in for the first few years, the structure of the course was, the structure of the program was 4 core courses, 4 electives, and a two-unit dissertation. And then we moved away, I think, from the dissertation, so it was a 1-unit essay. And frankly, I'm not sure whether that's still is still a compulsory element. I suspect that it's not, and so I think the number of electives you can take has increased. I think that's been taken. But in terms of the substance, a lot of the the core areas like M&A, options and futures, fixed income are all sort of still there. But then obviously as the financial world's developed, you see new electives coming along to cover those issues.
No, I certainly found the content to be quite relevant to what was going on in the world, and the investments course in particular had just a lot of current hedge fund managers, people who ran big institutions coming in and just talking about what it's actually like. So I found that there was a good balance between seeing the theoretical side of it and the sort of academic work, and also seeing what people are actually out in the world doing, which I thought was very interesting. And the Marmite course you mentioned, I think it's now called The Purpose of Finance, and it's very much still the Marmite course. It is loved or hated, but it was, I think at a fundamental level, it was good just to take a step back and kind of ask the question, why do we do what we do? How did we end up here? How much of it's been deliberate? How much of it is just an accident or cleaning up after previous things didn't work very well? So it was interesting.
It reminds me of a course that was on offer when I first joined the program. It was given by a guy called Sir James Ball, who I think unfortunately passed away quite recently. But he was heavily involved in the school from its very beginning, and he used to teach this course called The Week in Finance and Economics, and it literally had no syllabus. It was just you had to read the FT and the Wall Street Journal sort of each week, and be prepared to go to class and to discuss the issues. And it was he was probably the only person who could teach that. But it does that sort of big picture, what's going on in the world, sort of type of courses. I'm not sure whether that is anything sort of similar offered now, but it was, and I didn't actually do that one to be honest. But it always struck me as being the sort of thing that you could do in a specialist sort of program, and could for at least a subset of people be pretty interesting.
No, I don't think there's a course that does that specifically anymore, but we were certainly talking about things that were going on in the world, and a lot of professors would pull out slides from a company's sort of half-year or quarterly report and just sort of point out all the things that were interesting, or certain concepts in action, or things that were often being misused, which was quite interesting. It's good. So obviously, just so we can step back a little bit, you mentioned you'd moved down from Manchester and taken on this pretty heavy part-time course. I guess what was the highlight of it for you? What was the sort of highlight or top three things that came out?
I don't think I would point to any one sort of single thing. I mean, I think what I did afterwards is a pretty clear indication of the fact that I had a great time on the program. I think it was in a holistic way, the opportunity to really think about sort of these things that I said I've covered at a very superficial level during the accounting sort of training, but the opportunity to really sort of understand these ideas, to go further with them, to sort of see how they all link together. So it's not, there were, I mean, don't get me wrong, there were some very, very sort of good, good courses taught by great teachers. So, and people who are still at the school. So, Ian Cooper taught me corporate finance and valuation, who's probably one of the best teachers that I've ever come across. Steve Schaefer taught the Marmite course. So there was some very, very, high quality teaching, but I think it would be more the overall what I got out of it, rather than your specific specific sort of courses or specific.
Yeah, whenever I'm asked that question, I say it was the classmates and the sort of the learning. at the school, which I realise means that I liked all of it. So it's not even specific. But I think on the if you're watching and thinking about going to LBS, the thing I'd say is don't underestimate the impact that your classmates have on you. I learned so much from people that were also equity analysts, but people who were like traders. Being a sort of fundamental equities guy, I think they're witch doctors, but they actually have some really interesting points to say, and it's interesting to see how they will approach a situation versus how I would, and just the experiences people have had, and very much an uncensored behind the scenes view on what actually went on for some pretty cool events in finance history. So that was good, and also just the deep dive that you'd go into all these concepts in accounting and valuations and corporate finance. They were sort of taken to their limits and figured out, why do we do this? When does it work? When does it not work? What are the pros and cons of using these different methods? So yeah, I definitely came out feeling like I had a very broad and solid understanding of a lot of finance concepts, put it that way.
I mean, the point that you make about learning from your sort of classmates, I think, is a really important one. As I mentioned, I've written reference letters for a few people on the program, and obviously when I was involved with it, a lot of interviewing, and sat on the admissions committee, and that question of, is this somebody who will contribute to the class, is almost as, if not more important than does this person have the intellectual capacity to deal with the program? So because I think when we first talked, I said, I use this exact phrase, it sounds like a cliche, but cliches are cliches because there's a certain amount of truth in them, and you do learn as much from the people who you're in class with as the people who are sort of teaching you, and so having people from a range of different cultures, a range of different prior experiences, really does add to the experience. Yeah,
I was just thinking as you were saying that, then I was thinking about another guy who was also an equity analyst, and I was saying that I thought a company was a screaming short, and he sort of said, "Yeah, James, like, you're right, but the bull case on this, like, the bulls have to give up for this to play out, and the bulls are looking 10 years in the future, and they won't have their thesis disproven for a decade. So, I mean, you might be right, but you're probably going to be right in 10 years' time, which is not really a great return." And I was kind of going, "Oh yeah." That's and that's something I now use in my day-to-day job, just thinking, yeah, great, this company's struggled, or I think it's way overvalued, but when do the bulls agree with me on that one? So it's just the things like that you pick up, quite simple concepts that really stick with me and had a big impact. So in terms of the impact that the MiF has had on your career, I guess you've done the PhD, you've taught there, you're now a consultant in a Cornerstone Research. Sorry, you're now consult on topics and expert witness kind of stuff. I guess, has the MiF had an explicit impact on your career, or is it more beneficial for you just to feel comfortable that you knew what you were talking about?
I mean, in some ways that's a difficult question to answer, because the MiF. So I've got the MiF, and then I've got the 10 years afterwards at the school. But certainly together, those have taken had a big impact on what I've done since I left the school. But I think I can give an example from something I'm working on at the moment. And apologies that this things get a little bit sort of technical, but one of the things that you learn in probably it could be the valuation course now, I'm not quite sure exactly what it's, but it's this idea that you can think of sort of equity as being an option on the assets of the company. You think, oh yeah, that's a neat idea, but why would that potentially be relevant? Well, I'm currently working on a case. I obviously sort of can't divulge the details, but it's a case where something in the range of like $3 billion is at stake.
Okay.
And one of the pieces of analysis that we're doing is to to use that basic idea that I talked about, which is something that I covered in one of the core courses, to use the observed bond prices of the company in question to figure out what its assets are worth. And that's something where you couldn't go and pick up a textbook that would show you exactly how to do, to answer this specific question. But the point that I made about the fact that you think you're able to cover these topics in quite a lot of detail and depth means that you have an understanding of them, which makes you able to think, okay, I know conceptually what I need to do here, and that thing that I was taught 20-something years ago, I can take it and I can modify it to this specific specific case, and so that's just one example. I mean, a lot of the work that I do involves sort of valuations. A lot of the work that Cornerstone does, and my own work involves looking at share price reaction to various sort of corporate announcements. So there's probably not a single day goes by that where I'm not doing something that I can trace back in some way to something that I did on the MiF. And I don't want to overplay it and sort of say, after a 1-year program, you come out being able to do all these things. But it gives you a toolbox, a skill set that as your career develops, you're able to build on, and depending on exactly what area you're working in, you're able to sort of pick from that toolbox and apply these ideas. So it goes back to this idea that it's a rigorous, academically sort of robust course, but with a practical bent. And I think that's one of the great attractions of it.
Absolutely. And I really resonate with your comments there about coming down to these sort of first principles. That it's not often that I come across something these days and can't figure out roughly what's going on or find the answer. And it's often pretty tricky stuff too. Like there'll be quite a complex situation in sort of corporate finance question. I used to work for an activist fund, and we would often encourage mergers. You're trying to merge companies that own stakes in each other and figure out the impacts of that. And it all gets pretty complicated because there is no textbook answer, but you can kind of take it right back to the first principles of corporate finance, that you don't create more pie by cutting it differently. And the sort of basic accounting stuff, like, well, if an asset goes up, then either an asset has to go down or debt or equity has to go up. So it was just having those basic principles there to go back to, which sound really obvious, but I guess because you've done it in so much detail in class, it's easier to bring up and easier to kind of implement them in a novel situation. I guess, can we talk a little bit about the alumni community? Like, how much interaction do you have with them? I guess for you, it's probably also your former students as well. Yeah,
you're probably a better place to answer that question in terms of your interaction, because we were, the part-time program is very different now from what it was. I mean, it used to be that we would come in the first year 2 evenings a week, and then the second year, obviously, depending on which electives you did. But it really was a come in, do the courses. We used to get dinner, which was great. But we weren't really that involved with the school. And so, for example, it would have been our 25-year reunion this summer, and it was, even before the pandemic, it was proving very difficult to get any sort of traction with. So we're definitely not the poster boys, as it were, for the strength of the alumni association or the alumni communities in general. You're right. I talk to a lot of people over the time the school, and I still stay in touch with some of them, but really as individuals rather than through the alumni group. So I would not use sort of my experience as indicative of what the alumni group has to offer. Yeah,
I guess my experience of it has been overwhelmingly positive, and that at least in London, you can't sort of escape the LBS alumni. They're absolutely everywhere. And so I'm still socially in frequent contact with my study group. We often go for drinks of various kinds and at various distances from each other. But they've been a great source of fun and games. But there's also the people that I have done the course with. If I'm interviewing for a job at a firm, you can sort of call them up and say, hey, let's have a bit of a chat about what actually goes on here. Is this somewhere that might work for me? Would you be happy to recommend me? That's been extremely useful. Just asking questions of these, I'm thinking, oh, well, I've got this problem I'm struggling with at work. I'm not quite sure how to value this part of the business or what. And you can sort of have a debate with your former classmates about what approach they would take. And because that we're used to debating this in classrooms, it's quite lively and quite informative discussion. And I guess the final part I've had from the alumni is a lot of the research I do as an analyst. You try and find out stuff that's difficult to find out or is not widely known. And so if there's an alumnus at I don't know, let's say I'm looking at the wind turbine industry and there's an alumnus that works in there, it can be quite useful just to call them up and say, hey, have you got 15, 20 minutes just to talk about what's actually going on there and what I should be looking at and what I should be ignoring, which is actually pretty interesting. Remember one of those discussions I had on wind turbines was I was trying to get to the bottom of all the technology that people kept saying we're going into these things. And I basically called this alum up and said, mate, what's going on? I don't get it. I feel like I'm being lied to. And he said, look, all that really matters is wingspan of the turbine. It's a windmill. The bigger the wingspan, the more energy it takes out. That's kind of the end of it. You can add a little bit in the sort of gearboxes and all that fancy stuff that people love to obsess over, but at the end of the day, wingspan is all that matters. So well, that's pretty easy then. It seems to be a commoditized product, and my research went from there, it just made things a lot easier because I could have sat there for hours at my desk reading papers and commentary and not come to such a simple solution. So yeah, I guess socially, professionally, they've been extremely useful. And not just my class, but I've contacted people 10 years 10 years behind me at LBS, and they've been wonderfully helpful. So yeah, that's been good. I guess for anyone that was thinking of joining LBS, what advice do you have for them, like how to make the most out of the course while they're there, and I guess after they've left?
So I think this is going to sound internally contradictory in a way, this answer. It's great to come into the program having a reasonably clear idea of what it is what your career plans are, where you would like to go, and how you think this is going to help you, and then and that will then and that actually help. That applies when you apply. Applies when you're thinking of sort of entering the program. So not have it be I'm going to grad school because it's the thing to do. To have it be part of a longer term. This is where I'd like my work, my career to go, and this is how it will help me, and that will enable you to think about, which sort of electives would I be interested in, and so on. But then where I think it becomes so internally contradictory is be prepared for the fact that you will find yourself interested in things that you didn't ever think you would find something interesting. So it's not that you have to come in on day one and have no deviation at all from the plan that you had for yourself, but be prepared to sort of think about areas of finance that say maybe new to you, you may have be aware of but thought wouldn't be that interesting, and be prepared to have that flexibility. And then I think the other thing, which is I think is an obvious point, is it for a lot of people, or for most people, it will be the last chance that you have to really study things in depth and in detail, just because you're interested in them. So so really take advantage of the that opportunity. Yes, I'm realistic enough to know that the vast majority of people do the program because of some career considerations, and that's the important thing. But don't think of it as just being a stepping stone to the next job. Think about it as being something that you'll enjoy in and of itself. And I think if you go in with that sort of attitude, then you end up contributing a lot more, but you end up also getting a lot more out of it.
No, I couldn't agree more with that. Coming in, I think personally, when I was trying to figure out what I wanted from LBS, it's kind of a daunting question to answer, because you might not get it and you might change your mind when you get there. And I think telling myself that was all right, that was a good outcome, because I'd been corrected and on the right course. I'd explored an opportunity and I'd decided it wasn't for me, so now I could go and do something else. That was very useful. So definitely have an idea about what you want out of it. And I guess the second one is to think, was thinking longer term. Like, it's not just about your next job. It's about what you're going to do for the rest of your career. And so think about it in terms of how it's going to prepare me, not just to, I don't know, if you wanted to move to the buyer side, or if you want to sort of accelerate your career within finance, or whatever it is. Think about it in terms of 5, 10 years, 15 years down the track. How is this going to help me? And if you're clear about that, you'll have a better chance of getting it, I think. It's good.